Evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it smiles like you, gentle and familiar, hidden behind routines of daily life. We wake up thinking of ourselves as decent, even righteous, carrying out small acts of kindness and claiming the moral high ground. Yet the quiet corners of our minds whisper questions we rarely dare to answer. What makes a person truly good? And why, despite the best intentions, do we sometimes stumble into actions that shock even ourselves? It is here, in the gray spaces between intention and impulse, that the story begins. Imagine a teacher standing in front of a classroom, genuinely committed to shaping young minds, yet secretly fueled by ambition and the desire for recognition. Imagine a soldier, brave and disciplined, who follows orders without question, convinced of his righteousness, while part of him hides fear, resentment, or a longing for control. A parent who sacrifices everything for their child, yet quietly measures love with expectations. Each of these people seems good at first glance, yet under the surface, the human mind is restless, constantly negotiating between self-interest and altruism. It is in these hidden negotiations that the seeds of moral ambiguity are planted. Even ordinary decisions carry the weight of paradox. Consider the man who, in a moment of frustration, lashes out at a stranger and then immediately apologizes, horrified by the intensity of his own anger. "I never thought I could do that," he whispers to himself, staring at his hands as if they betrayed him. The shock isn't just that he acted wrongly, but that he recognizes a capability within himself he had refused to acknowledge. It is a truth both unsettling and universal. The capacity for cruelty exists alongside compassion in every human being. Halfway through our exploration, a question emerges, subtle yet insistent. What if being good is just a story we tell ourselves? Every act of generosity, every smile shared with a friend, every selfless gesture may carry undercurrents of desire, pride, or fear. A soldier protects his comrades not solely out of courage, but because he fears failure. A parent gives not only from love, but also from the pressure of societal expectation. A teacher imparts knowledge not just to nurture, but to assert authority. The moral line is rarely clear, and the distinction between right and wrong is often more narrative than reality. It forces us to look inward and wonder, how often do our actions truly reflect the goodness we claim, and how often do they serve something far less noble? The mind is a labyrinth. Guilt and justification twist together, forming corridors we navigate without realizing. When we examine our motivations with honesty, we discover an uncomfortable truth. We are all capable of selfishness, deception, and harm, even as we perform acts we believe to be good. The ordinary person, the one we trust, the one we admire, harbors shadows. It could be a quiet envy of a colleague, a harsh word muttered behind a loved one's back, or the silent hope that fate favors us over another. These shadows, small and seemingly insignificant, hint at a much larger potential, a capacity for actions that could hurt, betray, or destroy. And yet, this is not a story of condemnation. Understanding the hidden complexity within ourselves is not an admission of inevitable evil, but a step toward awareness. It is here that moral reflection begins. Every whispered justification, every fleeting pang of envy, every moment of fear-driven reaction reminds us that goodness is not a static quality. It is fragile, contested, and constantly under negotiation. To recognize this fragility is to recognize our shared humanity. As the reflection deepens, the narrative quickens. The mind's duality becomes undeniable. We see the teacher whose praise masks a need for approval, the soldier whose courage is interlaced with fear, the parent whose care is measured in expectations. Ordinary people, in the ordinariness of their lives, are capable of kindness and cruelty, generosity and selfishness, love and harm. It is a paradox that challenges the simplicity of our moral judgments, asking us to reconsider what we mean when we call someone good. In the end, the realization settles quietly, unsettlingly. Every person is capable of both kindness and cruelty. The boundaries between good and evil are not drawn in sharp lines, but in shifting gradients of choice, pressure, and circumstance. The world we navigate is not composed solely of heroes and villains, saints and sinners, but people whose morality is fluid, evolving and fragile. And as the shadows of our own minds stir, a lingering question remains, carrying us toward the next truth. If goodness is as delicate and elusive as we now see it, what happens when that balance begins to tip? Nobody plans to cross the line. It just happens. One moment, life follows a familiar rhythm. Work, family, obligations, small acts of kindness. The next, a decision arises, subtle at first, like a whisper at the edge of consciousness. It is easy to convince ourselves that the line is far away, invisible, clearly drawn for others, but not for us. Yet pressure mounts quietly, in ways no one else sees, deadlines, expectations, fear, shame, until that line, whatever it may have been, dissolves entirely. He sits alone in his car, hands gripping the wheel, heart pounding with a mix of dread and justification. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he mutters under his breath, almost as if the air could erase the act he's contemplating. The moment is ordinary and yet monumental. Outside, life carries on. People laughing, children chasing a ball, the hum of traffic, indifferent witnesses to the fracture forming inside him. The weight of unseen pressures bends his morality until it snaps. And for a brief instant, the world seems both unbearably heavy and strangely permissible. Every choice carries consequences, yet in this moment, consequences feel abstract, distant, almost negotiable. The colleague he envies, the partner he resents, the stranger who cross him, they become shadows in the theater of his mind, their faces blurred by a mixture of anger and fear. "They don't understand me," he whispers, reasoning with himself. Denial, justification, rationalization. These mental scripts play on repeat, soften the edges of an act he knows deep down will change everything. The internal tension is unbearable, the kind that twists the gut and sharpens the pulse. Across town, a bystander notices something is off, a fleeting glance, a sense that something is not as it should be. Children continue to play, unaware that the world they inhabit holds cracks even in ordinary people. The ripple begins subtly, but once the line is crossed, nothing is ever the same. It is not an explosion of evil, but a quiet, decisive moment. A hand raised, a word spoken, a choice made that cannot be undone. The instant morality collapses, is both mundane and catastrophic, and it leaves behind a haunting vacuum where certainty once lived. The mind races for excuses. He thinks of his past good deeds, the sacrifices no one noticed, the times he put others first. "I am still a good person," he insists, repeating it like a mantra. But the act he has committed is irreversible. Shock and disbelief mingle with a strange relief, a feeling that the burden of choice is momentarily lifted even as the guilt creeps in. Every rational thought now fights against instinct, every memory against impulse. It is a dissonance that cuts deep, exposing the fragile human architecture of morality. And then it happens, the act that changes everything. Perhaps it is harsh words that shatter trust, a betrayal hidden beneath a smile, or an irreversible physical action. The consequences are immediate and invisible at first, but a ripple spread quickly. A friend hurt, a family member blindsided, a stranger whose life is subtly altered forever. The realization of what has occurred crashes over him in waves, a mixture of horror, disbelief, and an unshakable sense that nothing can restore what was lost. As the minutes stretch, he replays a moment endlessly, searching for clarity, searching for excuses, searching for a way back. But clarity does not come. The line has been crossed, and the world on the other side is unrecognizable. Every shadow of doubt now reflects a fragment of what he has done, and the audience can feel the tension as if it were their own. The fear, the pressure, the desperate need to survive morally and socially collide in a way that is both intimate and universally relatable. And in the quiet aftermath, a question lingers, unspoken but undeniable. What if the line was never clear? What if, in the cracks and pressures of ordinary life, each of us carries a version of this breaking point? The act is done. The consequences are spreading, subtle but unstoppable, and the next chapter of reckoning waits just beyond the horizon. Nobody becomes a monster overnight. It's always one small choice at a time. Each seemingly insignificant decision, each tiny compromise of principles, nudges a person closer to a precipice they barely recognize. The mind, intricate and persuasive, rationalizes each step with a whisper. Just this once, it won't matter. Everyone does it. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the line between right and wrong blurs until it vanishes entirely. It begins in the ordinary, a lie told to protect oneself, a shortcut taken at the expense of another, a justification that feels harmless in the moment. These minor acts, strung together like beads on a thread, weave a chain that can bind even the most principled souls. Consider a whistleblower turned manipulator, someone who once risked everything to expose injustice, only to find that power, attention, and the subtle thrill of influence began to reshape their motivations. "I didn't mean to become like this," they might confess in fragments of memory, a therapist noting the tremor in their voice as they recount decisions that seemed rational at the time. The transition is almost invisible, imperceptible to those watching from the outside. Friends and colleagues see a familiar person, unaware that each small compromise has quietly altered their moral compass. This is a frightening truth. Descent is gradual, almost poetic in its subtlety, and it rarely announces itself with fanfare. The scariest thing? We don't even notice it happening. The mind shields us from the enormity of our own transformation. Cognitive dissonance smooths the edges of our choices, allowing guilt to coexist with pride, wrongdoing with justification. A parent may exploit a child's achievements for personal validation while believing they are nurturing ambition. A soldier may bend the rules of engagement in a crisis, rationalizing that the end justifies the means. Every choice is cloaked in a story that preserves the self-image of decency, even as cracks form beneath the surface. Internal reflections cascade like a silent storm. I thought I was doing the right thing. I was helping, wasn't I? The questions echo, layered with anxiety and regret. Yet the narrative we craft for ourselves is compelling. It tells us that our intentions are pure, our actions justified. And in these private chambers of the mind, fear and pride dance together, crafting a reality where moral compromise is almost imperceptible, almost natural. Empathy begins to bend under pressure, slowly, imperceptibly, until it becomes selective. The mind decides who deserves compassion, who does not, and why. The turning point comes when patterns become visible, when we step back and see the web we have spun. Each choice that once seemed minor now takes on new weight. The thief who started by taking a small indulgence for survival now realizes that the theft has become habitual, almost effortless. The manipulator who once fought injustice now wields deception as a tool, convincing themselves that ends justify means. Understanding why this descent occurs does not excuse it, but it humanizes it. We see the fragile scaffolding of fear, desire, and circumstance that props up moral collapse. The descent is not sudden. It is calculated by circumstance, emotion, and self-deception working in concert. It is here that the chilling recognition sets in. The villain, the manipulator, the person who committed acts we recoil from, was once just like us. Their hopes mirrored ours. Their fears echoed ours. Their capacity for love and pain identical. And yet, small choices, unchecked impulses, and hidden compromises slowly paved a path to actions that shocked the conscience. The horror lies not in their differences, but in their familiarity. Every audience member can see reflections of themselves in the cracks of these lives, in the moments when morality wavered, when judgment faltered, when fear whispered louder than reason. Subtle case studies bring this closer to home. The whistleblower turned abuser, the ordinary employee who slowly engages in unethical acts, the parent whose love becomes control, all mirror the same psychological architecture. The patterns are unmistakable. Incremental choices, rationalizations, the illusion of self-control, and the eventual surrender pressures both internal and external. Empathy intertwines with dread, as the audience realizes that human nature is malleable, pliable, and capable of both profound good and unfathomable harm. By the end of this descent, the audience is left in a liminal space between horror and understanding. The narrative is no longer about a distant other committing heinous acts, but about recognizing the fragility of the moral compass within us all. We see the architecture of human choice, the invisible forces shaping every decision, and the terrifying truth that, under certain conditions, any of us could find ourselves on a similar path. And as this awareness settles, an uneasy question emerges. If the descent is gradual, silent, and hidden, how many moments of compromise lie ahead in our own lives, waiting to tip the balance? The answer is as unsettling as it is essential, and it carries the story forward into the next stage of reflection and revelation. We all have stories to make our sins sound noble. From the smallest white lie to the most consequential betrayal, The human mind is a master storyteller, weaving excuses and rationalizations into a narrative that protects the ego. A parent convinces themselves that strict discipline is love. A leader believes ruthless decisions offer the greater good. A colleague insists that bending rules is necessary to survive. Each justification feels reasonable, even righteous, until the line between truth and deception dissolves entirely. Sometimes the lie feels more comfortable than the truth. It cushions the conscience, softens the sting of guilt, and allows the mind to continue believing in its own integrity. "I did what I had to do," one might mutter, voice low and defensive, as if the words themselves can erase moral friction. These whispers become habitual, the first scaffolding of self-deception. What begins as a small story grows, building invisible walls that separate the individual from reality. The mind, desperate for coherence, embraces these tales, smoothing over contradictions with subtle irony. The very act of claiming righteousness often camouflages wrongdoing. We watch as ordinary people navigate their lives under these invisible rules, unaware of the extent to which justification governs their actions. A manager fires an employee for reasons he rationalizes as efficiency, ignoring the fear and humiliation in the person's eyes. A parent punishes a child harshly, convinced the lesson is for their benefit, oblivious to the silent resentment building beneath. Leaders make decisions that cost lives, yet sleep peacefully because they convince themselves it was unavoidable. The excuses we tell ourselves are rarely shocking on the surface. They are quiet, almost polite, but their effects ripple through relationships, trust, and conscience. Internal dialogue often reveals a tension between conscience and justification. "I'm not a bad person. I just did what needed to be done." One thinks, the words an attempt to reconcile action with self-image. The audience begins to feel the duality, empathy for the pressure and circumstances, frustration at the rationalizations. It is a delicate balance, a dance between understanding and condemnation. Each small defense, each subtle self-persuasion, gradually reshapes perception, allowing behaviors once unthinkable to appear reasonable. The turning point comes when justification stops serving reason and begins to serve illusion. The stories we tell ourselves no longer clarify reality. They construct it. The parent who believed their harshness was love now avoids confronting the damage. The leader who convinced themselves of necessity now denies accountability. And the ordinary worker who rationalized minor unethical acts now slides toward larger moral compromises. What was once a narrative of righteousness becomes a self-imposed prison. An escape requires facing truths that feel inconvenient, uncomfortable, or impossible. The realization arrives quietly but with force. Being right can be as dangerous as being wrong. Clinging to moral superiority, to the narrative that justifies every act, blinds us to harm, blinds us to opportunity for growth. One can commit injustice under the banner of reason and emerge believing they were righteous. Empathy becomes selective, conscience negotiable, and the self-image of goodness becomes a fragile mask, worn to avoid the discomfort of reflection. In this space, subtle irony hangs in the air. The mind's cleverness in defending itself often leads it further from actual morality. Examples emerge as case studies, familiar yet unsettling. The CEO who praises efficiency while ignoring suffering, the parent who frames control as care, the citizen who excuses inaction with social norms. Each demonstrates the seductive power of self-justification. Their actions are not inherently monstrous, yet the narratives they embrace shield them from moral reckoning, revealing the paradox that rationality can sometimes pave the way to wrongdoing. It is a story repeated in countless forms, in homes, offices, and institutions, quietly shaping choices while maintaining the illusion of integrity. As the reflection deepens, the audience is left grappling with their own justifications, subtle or overt. The mind's ability to rationalize, to cloak discomfort with story, challenges the simplicity of moral judgment. We begin to see the invisible scaffolding beneath the facade of rightness, a structure that, if unchecked, can guide even ordinary people toward consequences they never imagined. And just as the tension peaks, the narrative leaves a quiet, unsettling question lingering. How many of our own actions are guided by truth, and how many are constructed tales meant to protect a fragile ego? This question, unresolved, carries the story forward, hinting at the darker truths that lie ahead. After the act comes the silence, and the silence screams, The room feels impossibly still, yet every corner echoes with the weight of what has been done. He sits alone, head in his hands, trying to make sense of the moment that cannot be undone. The world outside moves on, indifferent to the rupture inside him, but inside, the mind races with fragments of memory, whispers of choices, and the relentless pull of guilt. Each heartbeat is a reminder, each breath a question. How could I let this happen? Can you forgive yourself for something you can't undo? He thinks of the faces of those affected, the stranger, the friend, the child, and a cold knot forms in his chest. I didn't mean for it to go this far, he whispers, voice trembling, almost inaudible even to himself. Memories loop like a film reel, each frame sharper, more accusing than the last. The words left unsaid, the opportunities to act differently, the moments of hesitation ignored, they haunt him, blending into a relentless tide of self-reproach. The mind seeks solace in denial, in the small comforts of rationalization, but even these fail to quiet the roar of remorse. The first cracks appear in moments of reflection. He remembers kindness given before the fall, juxtaposed against the harm now done. The contrast is unbearable. The same hands that offered help once now tremble with shame. I thought I was different. I thought I was better, he mutters, fragment of thoughts scattered like autumn leaves in a windstorm of emotion. The silence is heavy, not because it is empty, but because it forces him to confront the truth he had tried to avoid, that good intentions do not always inoculate against wrongdoing, and that every choice carries consequences beyond comprehension. Guilt, once distant, becomes tangible. It manifests as a physical weight pressing down on his chest, a constant ache that refuses to be ignored. Sleep is restless, dreams haunted by the faces of those he has wronged, by the moments he could not reclaim. Each morning brings the same question. How can one move forward while carrying the irreversible? The mind oscillates between despair and fleeting hope, trying to reconcile the past with an uncertain present. Remorse is no longer abstract. It is visceral, intimate, inescapable. Voices from memory emerge, not as accusation, but as reflection. The child whose laughter he disrupted, the friend whose trust he shattered, the silent bystander who suffered without recognition. They speak in fragments of memory, a symbolic conscience that refuses to let him rest. I didn't mean to hurt you, he whispers, though he knows words cannot repair the fracture. The echoes of these voices serve both as punishment and as a mirror, forcing him to recognize the depth of human vulnerability and the cost of moral failure. The turning point comes when denial finally fractures. The excuses no longer hold. The stories he told himself crumble under the weight of experience. He can no longer pretend that circumstances absolve him or that intent is enough. The realization is raw, painful, and transformative. Guilt is not merely a feeling, but a call to awareness. Every attempt at justification falls away, leaving only the stark truth of accountability and a profound, often terrifying, understanding of personal responsibility. And then comes the breakdown, not cinematic in spectacle, but devastating in its intimacy. Tears fall unbidden, words choke in the throat. Confessions are muttered into the empty room. I failed. I can't take it back. I am so sorry. The emotional release is both crushing and cleansing, a confrontation with a self that cannot be avoided. It is a moment of reckoning, where the human capacity for error meets the equally human need for understanding and redemption. The climax of this inner journey is the recognition of shared humanity. He sees in fragments that every person carries a potential for both harm and healing. Guilt, though agonizing, is also a testament to conscience, to empathy, to the awareness that choices matter. It is the way of accountability that allows for reflection, the pressure that can, if navigated with honesty, lead to growth. And as the silence lingers, he realizes that while the act cannot be undone, the path forward can be chosen, slowly, painfully, but with the possibility of reparation, understanding, and self-forgiveness. In this heavy, reflective quiet, the audience is invited to sit with the truth. Vulnerability, remorse, and moral failure are universal. The story does not end with despair, but with a haunting, necessary recognition that falling is human, that guilt is a signal of empathy, and that confronting the consequences of our actions is the first step toward reconciliation with ourselves and the world around us. The echo of these lessons carries forward, preparing the mind to explore not just why people falter, but how they might find their way back, a truth both intimate and universal. The monster we fear is often just a reflection. In the quiet moments when the world feels still, we catch glimpses of ourselves and others, in their anger, their fear, their choices. It is unsettling, the recognition that the line we draw between good and evil is often one we project outward, a convenient division that spares us from looking too closely at our own hearts. We marvel at the cruelty of strangers, the malice in distant headlines, the betrayals and lies far removed from ours, yet the truth remains. The capacity for harm exists in every mind, even the most ordinary, even our own. Would you still call them monsters if you saw yourself in them? It is a question that lingers almost unbearably because it forces introspection. The child who lies to protect a fragile ego, the neighbor who cheats when no one is watching, the friend who betrays trust under pressure. They are not caricatures of evil. They are mirrors, subtle and unrelenting, reflecting fragments of our own potential. And the reflection is neither accusation nor absolution, but an invitation to understand the delicate architecture of human morality. We move through life seeking certainty, craving clear definitions. Heroes and villains, saints and sinners, right and wrong. Yet in the mirror, these definitions blur. The person we admire can falter. The person we despise may carry unseen burdens. Goodness is not a static trait, but a fragile equilibrium, tested by circumstance, pressure, and desire. In this space, empathy and fear intertwine, teaching us that morality is a dynamic conversation, not a fixed destination. The calm awareness of this duality is at once liberating and haunting, a poetic recognition of the complexity within ourselves and others. The mind reflects upon choices made, paths taken and forsaken, and the quiet consequences that ripple outward like unseen waves. We see how acts of harm can coexist with moments of profound care, how selfishness and generosity can reside side by side. The reflection is subtle but persistent, a reminder that understanding the capacity for darkness is essential to nurturing the light. There is a haunting beauty in this realization. To recognize our own fragility is to open the door to empathy, to compassion, to conscious choice. Minimal dialogue punctuates these reflections, not as explanation but as gentle inquiry. Could I have done the same? A whisper floats across the mind. The question does not accuse, it invites contemplation. In recognizing the shared human capacity for both harm and healing, the audience is encouraged to confront uncomfortable truths without judgment, to see complexity instead of caricature, and to accept that fear of the other often conceals a fear of oneself. The turning point emerges in quiet understanding. Good versus evil is not binary. It is a spectrum, a fluctuating tension shaped by circumstance, psychology, and morality. The very act of observing others, of judging, of wondering, illuminates the mirror within. In acknowledging this, the audience experiences a subtle awakening, a recognition that the world is not divided into monsters and innocents, but composed of human beings navigating choices that can lead to harm or healing, sometimes in the same breath. Clarity emerges not as absolution, but as awareness. Understanding evil is not indulgence, it is protection. It is the acknowledgement that the shadows we fear in others may rise in ourselves if left unchecked, and that moral vigilance, empathy, and reflection are essential tools for navigating life. The mirror teaches that accountability begins within, and that to prevent harm externally, we must confront the potential for harm internally. As the reflection deepens, a quiet hope surfaces. Recognizing the reflection does not trap us in despair. It offers the opportunity to act with intention, to choose understanding over fear, compassion over judgment, and conscious morality over blind impulse. The moment is contemplative, cinematic in its stillness, carrying the audience into a space of both introspection and possibility. The echoes linger. The monster we fear is part of us, but so too is a capacity for care, for repair, for choice. In the slow fade of thought, the truth settles softly, insistently. To understand evil is not to succumb to it, but to recognize it, learn from it, and prevent it. Awareness becomes both shield and guide, illuminating the hidden corners of human nature, while offering a path toward empathy, responsibility, and hope. And as the reflection fades into silence, a final question hovers in the mind, quiet yet profound. If the monster we fear is ourselves, what steps will we take today to ensure that we act with the goodness we wish to see in the world? Every fall offers a choice to hide or to heal. The weight of past mistakes presses heavily, a constant reminder that actions once taken cannot be erased. Yet within that pressure lies possibility. The person who faltered, who crossed invisible lines and faced the consequences of their own moral compromise, stands at a threshold. Behind them is a shadow of guilt, regret, and loss. Ahead is the fragile path of accountability, reflection, and redemption. The journey is neither quick nor easy, but it is real, and it begins with a simple decision to confront the truth. The real story isn't who fell, but who stood back up. In quiet rooms, in empty streets, in the minds of those willing to face themselves, transformation begins. I learned that guilt can build walls or bridges, someone whispers, voice low but resolute. The walls imprison, holding the past as a constant punishment. The bridges connect, transforming remorse into insight, regret into action, and self-reproach into empathy. Ordinary people, ordinary lives, can contain extraordinary potential for change, if only they acknowledge the consequences of their choices and take responsibility for them. Survivors and reformers emerge in subtle ways. A teacher who once manipulated trust now mentors students with honesty and humility, showing that awareness and learning can reshape influence. A soldier who once obeyed blindly now advocates for accountability, understanding that courage is not just action but conscience. Children, too, witness these transformations. The next generation learns not only from the mistakes of their elders, but from their willingness to confront them. These symbolic figures carry the weight of example, quietly demonstrating that redemption is not a distant ideal, but a lived, tangible reality. The turning point comes in acknowledgement. To confront one's own moral failings is to open the door to growth. There is humility in admitting wrongdoing, strength in bearing responsibility, and hope in the willingness to make amends. I cannot change the past, but I can shape what comes next, murmurs a voice, echoing to the landscape of reflection. This moment of clarity is transformative, a pivot where despair softens into resolve, and where the path forward becomes visible, even if narrow and uncertain. Accountability becomes not punishment, but a tool for shaping a better self and a more conscious life. The journey is fraught with tension. Healing requires facing the discomfort of others' pain, recognizing the ripple effects of one's actions, and enduring the personal unease of moral introspection. Yet, within this struggle lies the power of empathy and understanding. The heart, once burdened by guilt, begins to feel lighter as lessons take root. Compassion for oneself and others grows, grounded not in denial or justification, but in the honest reckoning with reality. Small acts of repair, an apology, a correction, a choice made differently, accumulate into a quiet but profound transformation. The climax arrives in moments both personal and collective. It is the first time the wrongdoer acts not out of fear or convenience, but with conscious awareness of impact. A gesture of kindness, an act of integrity, a spoken acknowledgement of truth. These are the sparks of moral rebirth. Communities, friends, families, and bystanders observe subtle changes, noting that the person who once faltered now stands in alignment with conscience. The narrative shifts from one of failure to one of recovery, from despair to actionable hope. Redemption does not erase the past. It reframes it, providing lessons, insight, and the possibility of renewed connection. Hope continues to build as the audience witnesses the ripple effects of change. Lives touched by the past are not erased, but they are softened by understanding and accountability. The fallen are no longer defined solely by their missteps, but by the courage it takes to confront them. Moral awakening, then, is not an abstract ideal, but a lived process, observable in choices, words, and acts. Humility blends with growth, and the human capacity for resilience becomes tangible. And as the reflection settles, the ultimate truth becomes clear. The only way to change the world is to understand the darkness within. Each of us carries potential for error and harm, but each of us also carries the potential for awareness, empathy, and repair. The path of redemption is neither easy nor guaranteed, but it is available to anyone willing to face themselves honestly. The shadows we encounter in others are reminders of what we might choose to confront in ourselves. Look inward, because the only way to change the world is to understand the darkness within. Through acknowledgement, responsibility, and the courage to act differently, we discover that growth is possible, that empathy can flourish, and that human lives, scarred as they may be, can become a testament to reflection, healing, and hope. The story closes not with perfection, but with a quiet, enduring power. The knowledge that moral awakening begins inside, and that the choices we make afterward define not only ourselves, but the world we leave behind.